Thanks, Anderson. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jerry Tinianow. I'm a sustainability mechanic based in Denver. In 2010, on April Day, on Earth Day of 2010, when I was the director of the Center for Energy and Environment at the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, we released the first regional food system assessment and plan in the United States. So that was 14 years ago. And since then, I've been involved in a lot of effort, a lot of work, both in Ohio and in Denver on local food. I've learned a lot along the way. And I've tried to distill what I've learned down into the 10 commandments of local food. And I'm going to give them to you today in case you are interested in doing local food planning or programming in your community. I'm going to go through these 10 and walk you through them pretty quickly. And then at the end, I'll do a quick summary. So let's see if we can figure out. Rule number 1, don't romanticize, because there's a lot of mythology around local food and a tendency to just elevate it so high. Andres Duany, the great urban planner, when he gave a presentation on local food a few years ago, he really summed it up when he said, it all sounds great until someone has to pick up a wheelbarrow. Because growing food is hard. It is hard, and I know a lot of the people in this room know it's hard. And so you don't want to romanticize it. You need to be a realist when you put a local food program together. Second, don't oversell it. Don't claim that it can do things that it can't actually do, particularly in the area of climate change. Local food systems can be climate friendly, but often they are not. They tend to be very carbon intensive because the transportation systems aren't particularly efficient. So you can work towards making the local food system do what you want, but it doesn't happen automatically. You need to be realistic about what it can and cannot do, and you need to never oversell it to your community. Rule number 3, commandment number 3, which I think is the most important, is always pick a lead agenda. When I got into this in Ohio for the first time, and we brought our dozens of volunteers together, they brought a lot of agendas to the table. Some of them wanted to have healthy food, some of them wanted to have organic food, some wanted vegetarian, some wanted to build jobs in the community, some wanted to have land use changed and so forth. And there are multiple agendas. They are all legitimate, but they don't always play well together, particularly local food and healthy food. There's nothing inherently healthy about local food. It can be healthy. But when I moved to Denver to take the job as chief sustainability officer, 2 blocks down there was a plant that put together corned beef. Local food, not particularly healthy food. And so it's not that you shouldn't pursue more than one agenda, but you really have to pick one out and say, this is the one we're going to lead with, whether it's local development or whether it's land use or whether it's putting people to work or healthy food. You got to pick one to be the leader. We picked local development. We actually won the Trailblazer Award from the National Association of Development Organizations for that plan. Plan regionally. Remember I said we had the first regional food system assessment and plan? Now, cities had done food plans before us, but the problem is your food system has to feed people nutritionally for every day of the year, 365 days a year, 366 this year. And typically within the boundaries of a city, whether it's Whitefish or Denver, you cannot satisfy the nutritional needs of your residents just within your city boundaries. You need a region that's large enough to do that. And so if you're going to really provide a nutritional diet to everyone 365 days a year, you really need to do a regional plan, not a local plan. You got to put someone in charge. This is one of the big failings I see in a lot of sustainability and climate plans generally. They come up with a great plan, but they don't put someone in charge who's responsible. And when I say in charge, I mean they have the authority, they have the resources, they have the knowledge and experience, and they have the accountability. That doesn't mean that that person or that entity has to do it all themselves, but they have to be in charge. I have seen communities walk away at the end of the planning process without doing that, and they inevitably have a lot of problems with implementation. In many cases with food, you create a local food policy council, and you bring a lot of partners together and empower that council to implement the plan, but someone has to be in charge. Commandment 6, focus on scale. Food, again, is 365 days a year, and there's a lot of it. And I see a lot of these food plans get quickly into community gardens and farmers markets. I love community gardens and farmers markets, but they are not going to feed your community at scale. They really aren't, particularly if you live in an area like this with a 4-season climate. Community garden, you may have a couple of harvests, few harvests a year. The farmers market is only open on weekends in warm weather. So you need to focus on scale and operate on scale if you're going to have a really effective food system. Which leads us to commandment number 7, which is you have to include year-round elements. Because again, it's 365 days a year. The farmers market typically shuts down in the fall, and the community garden also shuts down. If you want to look at a year-round local food system, look at the Eastern Market in Detroit or the West Side Market in Cleveland or the unbelievable farmers market that they have in Madison, Wisconsin. If you're ever there on a Saturday morning, go to their huge farmers market. And I talked to the market manager one year, and I said, so what do you do in the winter? And he said, in the winter we have to go indoors, so we go to our convention center and we only have 50 vendors during the winter. And I was astounded. 50 wintertime vendors for local food? That's what I call an effective farmer's market. So you want to make sure that you have year-round elements. Remember when Bill Clinton said it's the economy, stupid? So in local food, it's the processing and distribution. Local food does not end with where did we grow it. That's important. But you have to process the local food as well. All those ancient techniques of salting and smoking and pickling and all of that stuff. If you're going to obey commandment number 7 and have a year-round food system, then you want local processing to be part of it, especially because that's where the full-time year-round jobs with benefits are. You don't just want to grow the food and then send it somewhere else to be preserved. You want to actually do the preservation in town if you possibly can. You want to put needs before wants. If you walk into the Safeway here in Whitefish, you go in there and say, how much of this do we really need? It's probably about 10% of what's there. You can get along nutritionally with 10% of what you see in a normal grocery store. So focus on that 10% in your food plan, because that's how you feed people. That's how you provide for basic needs. The other 90% will take care of itself. And finally, the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet, which is, as you know, also the 10th commandment in the actual 10 commandments. But what I mean by that here is, what do we covet, whether it's in food or climate change or whatever? We covet best practices. And I hate that term. I hate the term best practices because it's overused so much. Sometimes it's used to say what everybody is doing. Everybody's doing it, so it must be a best practice. Have you ever heard the story of the emperor has no clothes? Everybody's doing it, not a best practice. And sometimes it's the latest, newest, shiny thing. That's the best practice. How many of you arrived today on a Segway? Remember when Segways were going to be the best practice, except they never were? No, the best practice is something that works. That's my test. It's the best practice if it works, and there are very few of them. Because if we had best practices in climate change, we wouldn't be having this conference today. We'd have already solved the problem through those best practices. So don't use the term, don't covet best practices. I use the term precedents. Look around to see what other people are doing and take what may work for you. But don't try to get to perfection. Don't covet perfection or best practices right away. Because what happens when you covet those best practices and you go to the decision makers about them, immediately they say, we can't do that here. And because it's just too ambitious. And you don't need to go to best practices. You need to go to better practices. You need to do a plan and a system that's going to work for your community quickly and effectively. Don't get caught up in aiming for perfection. So to wrap up, I'll just say, if you follow the 10 commandments, if you follow all 10 of them, I think you'll have a great local food plan and a great local food system, and you will be blessed. Yeah, thank you very much, everybody.